Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, wanted to start with this picture because it's a nice picture, but as you all know, that the theme of this conference is evocative of a different picture, one that's closer to this. And I was really inspired by the question that I was given as the thematic question for this, and I wrote it down. This was, what do you do? How do you deal with a world that is burning? This was the question. You all know this. I don't have to read it all to you. But for me, the question might be, before we ask what do we do, is to ask ourselves why. Why do we want to engage with a world that is burning around us? It's not easy. It might be much easier to just sort of pretend that it's not our problem. And so the question might be, why do we want to engage with a world that is burning around us? And I thought to show you what might be the alternative. I hope you'll find this funny. I thought it was funny when I saw it. That this is our alternative of what we can do instead. And the philosophy that I'm most familiar with that explains what motivates human behavior. Before I came across nonviolent communication, there was this idea that human beings are a kind of like a creep theory of human beings. Human beings, we are, unless we are influenced by civilizing influences, education, church, or whatever it is that we need to control our impulses, unless we get these civilizing factors, what human beings, left to our own devices, that we are likely to want to harm each other. So the assumption is, if we are without these positive influences in our lives, that we are animals, in a sense, who will try to get away with harming each other, if we can, and if not, we will do it in a very sleek and sophisticated way, but that our purpose is to try to get the best for ourselves and keep others from advancing. And I think this one is really beautifully demonstrated by a quote from Thomas Hobbes, who was a political philosopher whom you might all be familiar with, where this is a quote of his that says that the life of man, solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. And if we believe that this is what is ahead for us, this is the natural state of a human being, then of course it makes sense that we might all want to do this when we are faced with challenging situations. Why bother? So I want to talk a little bit about the conceptual framework, what I'm calling the distrust paradigm that underlies or that stems from this theory of human beings as nasty, brutish, out for our own good, in our own interest. So I want to make a contrast between what I'm calling distrust paradigm and what the trust paradigm might look like in comparison. So the first one in the distrust paradigm is that people, like I was saying before, people are mean, they're out for their own interest only, and given half a chance, will take advantage of each other. The contrast, again, this is about the conceptual framework. The contrast might be, in the trust, if we had a trust paradigm, that people care, that maybe our nature is compassionate, and that we actually want to contribute to life and to each other, and if given a chance, we will do so. And one way I think about this is that we can think of human beings, again, as creeps, who we need to control and civilize, or as beings that are trying to meet needs, human needs that we all have, with whatever tools we have at hand. So if we give better tools, we might choose them if they were available to us. If we believe that if we are operating from the trust paradigm, we might think of that as the option. In the distrust paradigm, then what happens is you have to have a way of judging people. How do you choose who to blame? How do you control? How do you tell who are the ones that need to be civilized? You have a system for figuring out how to blame, who to blame, how to punish. Our justice system is set up on that. Our philosophical systems are often set up on this. In the trust paradigm, again, the contrast might be, instead of judging and blaming, that maybe we try and see what the underlying needs are that people are trying to meet when they do the things that they do. Whether we like what they do or not, the needs might be something that's human and understandable. So that might be a compassionate approach. Another consequence of the distrust paradigm is that how do you change behavior? If people are doing things you don't like, you need to motivate them through fear of punishment. Or, at best, our imagination can come up with is the reverse of that, which is motivate people by desire for reward. So instead of sticks, we give them carrots. But it's still the same dynamic of motivating people from external, outside of themselves. Either fear to avoid punishment or to gain reward. In the trust paradigm, it might be a completely different approach. How do you change behavior? From intrinsically connecting with themselves, empowering them from internally, connecting to the needs that they have to serve life. That might be a way that we would approach behavior change. Then another consequence of a distrust paradigm is that few people at the top, they're the ones that matter. Money is what matters. If you don't have money or power, you're an insect, as we talked about, you heard earlier. Dehumanizing people and categorizing them into the ones that matter and the rest of us. And in the trust paradigm, it's an assumption that everybody matters. So it's quite a radical idea of including every human being, and every human being matters. And creating systems. Can you imagine the kind of systems we would create if that was the assumption? And then another aspect of the distrust paradigm is how power is understood. An aspect of this is if we think that people are not trustworthy, then power would mean how do we push them around? How do we contain them? How do we control them? How do we exert authority over them? And earlier in the talk also, this idea of creating invulnerability and borders is how do you keep people under control? Because they can't be trusted, of course. In the trust paradigm, the power might be understood as a power with. If you think of, there's a metaphor that one of my teachers uses. If you think of life as a kind of cellular network, through the body, it would be really ridiculous to think that one cell is going to put up borders and protect itself because it's got to be more powerful and push other cells around. Clearly, it's going to be the death of the whole. And if we don't think of, that's how we think. That's how, even though the planet Earth and life is clearly all interdependent and interconnected, we are in the delusion of thinking that we can actually create the world we want by pushing each other around and creating borders and separating ourselves from life itself and from others. And then another aspect of the distrust paradigm, the power over others is the only effective way to control. I already said that, actually. They're connected. So the alternative might be that power with others is an effective way of caring for each other and eliciting cooperation, creating a world where everybody matters, where we can co-create a world that works, that includes everyone. Again, this is like, if we are thinking that way, then what we look for and what we try to create is radically different. So we haven't had that at all, probably ever since man started, stopped being nomads and started being agriculture based. So we haven't had it, we've been practicing another way for a very long time. But if we start thinking in other ways, we might look for and find alternatives. And then the other aspect of the distrust paradigm is the amount of effort and money and energy and time put into policing people, into creating defensive systems that end up creating more horror in the world. The world we have, the world that's burning, I think in a sense it's inevitable result of certain, this kind of thinking, that we are going to bomb people into cooperating with us and not wanting to kill us. That's a real logical thought, isn't it? But it does actually make sense if you have the assumption of the theory of human beings that I'm talking about. In the other paradigm, energy, time, the enormous human creativity and potential that we have might be put into creating systems and that will be nurturing, teaching, learning, and creating systems that serve life. Given I have 20 minutes, I'm doing a lot of hand waving instead of telling you any details, but this... Okay, great. So now I wanted to show you the consequence, one of the consequences of the system distrust paradigm. Then in this paradigm, as I said before, people need to be controlled. So we have a language that is focused on judging, blaming, criticizing. 3 hours this morning we spent talking about how we normally speak and what we might do differently if we want to create a compassionate world. But in the world in the distrust paradigm, it makes sense. Again, in order to find out who to punish, we need to be able to judge and blame and criticize. And then we have systems, social structures that are again based on domination. So we have a justice system that's all about finding out who's at fault and giving them appropriate punishment. We think that we're going to elicit behavior change in people by punishing them. Even though I don't know how many studies have shown that people go into prison and come back more likely to commit crimes than when they went in. But we keep doing it because we're stuck in a conceptual framework where this is the logical thing to do. If we have a trust paradigm, then we might look for different, well, one is the language that we were talking about this morning, what we're calling nonviolent communication, language based on human needs, not on blaming, not on figuring out who's right and who's wrong, but on understanding the needs that human beings are trying to meet when they do the things that they do. And if we want them to do something different from what they're doing, we want to first try and have some compassion for the needs they're trying to meet by the behavior they're engaging in now, and offer them an alternative way they can meet that need that would be less harmful, for example. So it's a language that's based on figuring out, understanding the needs and trying to figure out strategies that work for people to meet their needs, rather than on who to blame, who to punish. And then if we operate within the trust paradigm, we would have different kind of social systems. Instead of top-down hierarchical domination-oriented social structures, we would have to create open, inclusive social structures, structures that are responsive to change, that are working with human internal, to internally motivate and to balance an accountability that's not coming from outside authority, but from the relationships that you build among people and among institutions. Again, I'm waving hands here because I don't have enough time to go into detail, but that's... So I'll end with a quote from Joanna Macy, my mentor, who's also a systems theorist that I referred to earlier, that you're only a small part of a much larger process, like a nerve cell in a neural net. So learn to trust. Be open to flows of information from the larger system, without the feedback loop of being able to be responsive to the system, when we have those borders and barriers that keep us more and more separate, we're not open to the feedback from the system, and we are going to destroy ourselves. I want to end with something other than that statement. So the alternative is to be able to create different kind of social structures that are responsive and that are really based on a paradigm of trust and compassion. I think it's possible. I think the human psyche, the human intelligence that we have, the potential is incredible, what we have been able to do. And if we can change certain, partly certain ways of thinking, certain conceptual frameworks, then I think we can come up with completely different systems. I hope so, at least.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Jeyanthy Siva.